Week 15 Day 1. Complicity and associate in crime. Since proceeding on the premise that the broker was guilty of complicity in the swindle, the detective followed him surreptitiously. Since complicity now knew formal involvement in a crime or some activity that is wrong, she is suspected of complicity in the fraud, liquidation, disposal of, killing. Since after the liquidation of the gang leader, a mammoth conflict arose among his ambitious lieutenants, who aspired to be boss. Since liquidate close verb I or T, to cause a business to close, so that its assets can be sold to pay its debts. Liquidation noun C or U. After 3 years of heavy losses, the company went into liquidation with debts totaling 100 million. Liquidator noun C. One of the people in charge of closing a company accomplice partnership in wrongdoing. Since, although he was judged as a minor accomplice, the driver had actually played an integral essential part in planning the crime. Accomplice and an associate in crime recant withdraw previous statements. Since when the clergyman refused to recant, his superiors were so nettled that they relegated degrade position him to an isolated parish in Alaska. Since recant verb I or T formal, to announce in public that your past beliefs or statements were wrong, and that you no longer agree with them. After a year spent in solitary confinement, he publicly recanted his views. Recantation noun C or U. Formal, culpable, deserving blame. Since once the incontrovertible undoubtable evidence was offered, the servant was held culpable in the theft of the jewels. Since culpable adjective formal, deserving to be blamed or considered responsible for something bad, he was held culpable, blamed for all that had happened. Culpability noun U. After the accident, the company refused to accept culpability. Culpably adverb wool gathering, absent-mindedness, or daydreaming. Sense, when the young genius should have been doing his homework, he was frequently engaged in wool gathering. Danny Escobedo goes to jail. In 1960, a young Chicagoan, Danny Escobedo, was given a 20-year jail sentence for first-degree murder. Danny had confessed to complicity in the killing of his brother-in-law after the police had refused to allow him to see his lawyer. Actually, Danny was tricked into blaming a friend for the liquidation of his sister's husband, thereby establishing himself as an accomplice. Despite the fact that Danny later recanted his confession, he was found culpable and jailed. Danny had been stereotyped, typical, modeled as a hoodlum, and nobody raised an eyebrow over the hapless felon's troubles. Week 15 Day 2. Abrogate, abolish. Since the wealthy uncle decided to abrogate his inane nephew's sinecure. Abrogate v. FML. Abolish, repeal by law. Since repeal, abrogation noun alleged, reported, supposed. Since it is symptomatic of some newspapers that an alleged criminal is regarded in print as guilty. Since alleged verb T formal, to state that someone has done something illegal or wrong without giving proof, plus that the two men alleged that the police forced them to make false confessions. Plus to infinitive, Mr. Smythe is alleged to have been at the center of an international drugs ring. Plus that it was alleged that Johnson had struck Mr. Rahim on the head. Alleged adjective formal, it took 15 years for the alleged criminals people thought to be criminals to prove their innocence. Allegedly adverb formal, that's where he allegedly killed his wife. Access, admittance. Since once the druggist had been duped into opening the store, the addict gained access to the pep pills. Access. Sense NV, admittance. Sense V, computer. Sense V, the children's father was refused access to them at any time, refused official permission to see them. The problem with some of these drugs is that they are so very accessible, able to reach or easily obtain. Covent Garden has made some attempt to make opera accessible to a wider public, easy to understand. And the accessibility of her plays, fact that they can be understood, means that she is able to reach a wide audience. Invalidate, to deprive of legal force, to nullify. Since the general was sure to invalidate the court-martial's decision once he learned of the flagrant bias of the presiding officer. Since invalid, not correct adjective 1, an invalid document, ticket, law, etc. is not legally or officially acceptable. I'm afraid your driving license is invalid in Eastern Europe. 2, an invalid opinion, argument, etc. is not correct, usually because it is not logical or not based on correct information. An invalid argument, invalidate verb T1, to officially stop a document, ticket, law, etc. being legally or officially acceptable. To prove that an opinion, argument, etc. is wrong. Invalidation noun U, premature disclosure of the test sites might lead to invalidation of the experiment. Invalidity noun invalidly adverb preclude prevent sense the manager was distraught when he realized that the slugger's sickness would preclude a World Series victory sense preclude verb T formal, to prevent something or make it impossible, or prevent someone from doing something. His contract precludes him from discussing his work with anyone outside the company. The fact that your application was not successful this time does not preclude the possibility of you applying again next time. Preclusion noun formal your age should not act as a preclusion to you being accepted on the university course. To whitewash to conceal defects, to give a falsely virtuous appearance to something no sense. Although a committee was appointed to investigate the corruption, many citizens felt that their report would be a whitewash of the culprits' felons. Escobedo's lawyer appeals. Barry Krall, a Chicago lawyer, took an interest in Danny Escobedo's case. Krall felt that his client's rights under the Constitution had been abrogated. Since the alleged accomplice, Escobedo, had been denied access to an attorney, Krall asked the courts to invalidate the conviction. He proposed that lawyers be entitled to sit in when the police question a suspect, but the Illinois courts rejected that on the grounds that it would effectively preclude all questioning by legal authorities. If such a law were upheld, the police felt that it would play havoc with all criminal investigations. Null Week 15 Day 3. Persevere persist sense if we persevere, we can overcome any of our inhibitions sense persevere verb I mainly approving, to try to do, or continue doing something in a determined way, despite having problems. It looks as if the policy will be a success, providing that the government perseveres, and does not give in to its critics. The education director is persevering in his attempt to obtain additional funding for the school. Despite receiving little support, the women are persevering with their crusade to fight crime. Perseverance noun humanely approving continued effort and determination. Through hard work and perseverance, he worked his way up from being a teacher in a village school to the headmaster of a large comprehensive. Persevering adjective mainly approving she was persevering enough to reach the height of her ambition and become the managing director of the company. Landmark historic, turning point of a period since the Battle of Midway was a landmark victory in the U.S. campaign for ultimate victory over the Japanese in World War II. Since landmark object noun see a building or place that is easily recognized, especially one which you can use to judge where you are. The Rock of Gibraltar is one of Europe's most famous landmarks. Since landmark stage noun see an important stage in something's development. The invention of the silicon chip was a landmark in the history of the computer. In a landmark case decision, the governor pardoned a woman convicted of killing her husband, who had physically abused her. Extrinsic foreign, coming from outside sense collectors avidly sought the rare coin for its extrinsic value. Null sense intrinsic adjective being an extremely important and basic characteristic of a person or thing, works of little intrinsic value. Interest maths is an intrinsic part of the school curriculum. Intrinsically adverb declaim speak loudly sense I knew that my father would declaim against mother's choice of ostentatious fabric sense declaim verb I or T formal, to express something with strong feeling, especially in a loud voice or with forceful language, plus speech. The end of the world is at hand. The poster declaimed. She declaimed against the evils of capitalism. Declamation noun see or you formal he subjected us to half an hour of impassioned declamation against the new motorway. Declamations against the press are common enough. Declamatory adjective formal a declamatory style fetter, to hamper sense the senator inveighed against the policy, because he felt it would fetter our Air Force sense fetter verb T1 literary to keep someone within limits or stop their advance. He felt fettered by a 9-to-5 office existence. 2. To tie someone to a place by putting chains around their ankles fetters plural noun 1 old use a pair of chains, which were tied round the legs of prisoners, to prevent them from escaping. 2. Literary something which severely limits you, the fetters of motherhood to break the ice, to make a start by overcoming initial difficulties. Null sense the auto salesman had a poor week, but he finally broke the ice by selling a fully equipped Cadillac. An historic Supreme Court ruling lawyer Krall persevered in his defense of Danny Escobedo. The case was argued before the Supreme Court, and in 1964, in a landmark decision, the court reversed Danny's conviction. Legal aid, said the judges, must be instantly available to a suspect. A system of law enforcement, that comes to depend on the confession, one justice declared, will, in the long run, be less reliable than a system that depends on extrinsic evidence independently secured through skillful investigation. A justice who declaimed against the decision said, however, I think the rule is ill-conceived, and that it seriously fetters perfectly legitimate methods of criminal enforcement. Week 15 Day 4. Paragon Model of Excellence. Since the town planners looked upon their utopia as a paragon for other communities, since paragon noun see a person or thing that is perfect or has an unusually large amount of a particular good characteristic. In the novel, Constanza is a paragon of virtue, who would never compromise her reputation. Nomadic wandering. Sense in the desert, nomadic tribes wander back and forth, enduring much privation. Sense nomad noun see a member of a group of people who move from one place to another rather than living in one place all of the time. A tribe of Somalian desert nomads. Nomadic adjective, nomadic people, herdsmen. A nomadic life existence. Asperity, harshness of temper. Since we were amazed at the display of asperity from our normally phlegmatic neighbors. Since asperity noun euformal, the quality of being severe in the way that you speak and behave. The asperity of her manner. Epithet, descriptive name. Since a bitter quarrel was precipitated, hastened, when both politicians hurled vile epithet at each other. Since epithet noun see formal, an adjective added to a person's name or a phrase used instead of it, usually to criticize or praise them. The opera singer's 104-kilo frame has earned him the epithet of Man Mountain in the press. Controversial, debatable. Since some school principals attempt to repress the publication of controversial editorials. Since controversy noun see or you, a lot of disagreement or argument about something, usually because it affects or is important to many people. There was a big controversy surrounding over the use of drugs in athletics. That policy has caused fierce heated controversy ever since it was introduced. Controversial adjective, causing disagreement or discussion, a controversial issue, decision, speech figure. The book was very controversial. Controversialist noun see a person who likes to disagree with other people and say things that make people angry or think about a subject. A religious controversialist. Controversial issue, phonetics, adverb, the grapevine, a secret means of spreading information. Since the grapevine has it that Ernie will be elected president of the school's student council. The effects of the Escobedo decision. After Danny Escobedo's release from prison, hundreds of inmates began suits for their freedom on the grounds that their rights had been violated, too. Each case was heard on its merits, and in numerous instances people who had been convicted of serious offenses were freed because of the new standards established in the Escobedo case. After getting out, Danny was not a paragon of virtue, according to the police. He led a nomadic existence, drifting from job to job, and was arrested frequently. With asperity, and a few choice epithets, Danny referred to police harassment. Although the Escobedo case was a controversial one, most agree that it inspired better police training, better law enforcement procedures, and improved scientific crime detection. Week 15 Day 5. Questionable advertisements. The Nostalgia Factory, a Boston art gallery, staged an exhibit of advertisements that had outraged various segments of the community. For example, one of the fast food chains ran a TV commercial that showed unattractive school cafeteria workers in hairnets, making that experience less tasty than a visit to Roy Rogers. Another ad that drew criticism from psychiatrists and groups, such as the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, suggested to readers that, if they had paid $100 for a dress shirt, they were fit candidates for a straitjacket. Similar sensitivity had restricted ad writers from using terms such as nuts or crazy. Why such protests, and where do they come from? Who is asking companies to abrogate contracts with those agencies that are culpable in creating racist types of commercial messages? Parents who took exception to the Burger King spot that announced, "Sometimes you gotta break the rules," said no to it, because it gave the wrong message to their children. And when a potato chip maker's ad featured a bandito, angry Mexican Americans used some choice epithets in denouncing such a stereotype. The conclusion to be reached is that segments of the population have become increasingly vocal about insensitive ads, demanding that corporations recant and never again commission advertisements that are clearly controversial, provocative, and harmful to good human relationships.